Seamless Garment of Christ. My paper is based on my original manuscript that you see here. It's a copy. It's 456 pages. Was copyrighted last year in 1999. I would like to give thanks to Ian Wilson for having reviewed this manuscript in its entirety prior to its copyright in June of 1999. Well, my talk is about the Seamless Garment of Christ, and basically that brings us to the status questionis, what is the shroud? And basically the premise that we all know is that the shroud is thought of exclusively as a burial cloth. This perception is obvious since the shroud itself looks like a burial cloth. But the question that arises actually came up some years ago by Rebecca Jackson, who had suggested that it was a tablecloth prior to its use as a burial cloth. And although this suggestion really has no basis in archaeology, on one hand, on the other, it does have merit in that it raises the question of a prior function and use of the linen. This issue, of course, is going to require two conditions be met, and that is, first of all, that this is consistent with Jewish burial customs of the first century, as well as the descriptions of the shroud in the Gospels. So the first thing we need to look at is what were the burial customs of the first century in Israel. Now, one source we have is from Jewish literature. It's the Talmud Bavli. And the Bavli has a tractate, or book, called the Moed Katan. And there in number 27b, we read that in the first century, it was Rabbi Gamaliel had passed a law that since there was discrepancies amongst Jews, the wealthy and the poor were being put to shame since the wealthy had elaborate burial cloths. So his idea was that they should bury them in what he used as a Hebrew term, takrikin. Now takrikin, if we go to various lexicons, is the plural for robe or robe cloths. And so we can see that the robe itself is plural because it's not only a garment, but it has a matching sash belt. So the term he uses is that they should bury the dead in their robe cloths. And so this is what the first century Jewish custom was. Now, these cloths through time became modified both in their design and function by the names we know them today, the talit or the kittel. And these are two contemporary Jewish men linen garments. The antique one, however, according to various rabbis, was a design known as the shepherd's coat. Now, like the talit or the kittel, the antique version of this four-cornered garment has a matching sash, as we said, and in each corner of this garment were tassels that are known as zitzit. Now, these, of course, hang in each of the four corners, and they transform this cloth from being an ordinary one into a religious vestment. Now, the use of the zitzit was actually a commandment found in the Torah in the book of Numbers, chapter 15, verses 37 through 41, where the Lord commands Jewish men to wear their four-cornered garments with zitzit in each corner, these elaborately macrame tassels. In my theory, as a four-cornered garment, and as I said, in each corner there's a tassel called a zitzit. Now, according to the Torah, these are usually dyed blue, but sometimes they were left undyed white. Here are where the armholes would have been in the original garment as a four-cornered garment, and as you can see, there are four of these tassels in each of its corners. And what we need to do is take a peek at how this corresponds. There are these pair of burn marks. It's the outermost pair is the original armhole, a about the shoulder area on both the front and the back. So that's those 4 holes originally. The holes you see made here were to the exact measurements and specifications of the shroud, where these burn marks are that I just pointed to, front and back. And it's, so it conforms. This piece here would have been called the sidarium. This piece here is the Sindone. Now it's called the Sindone because it has zitzit, the 4 tassels in each of the corners. As I told you, the zitzit was what makes this ordinary cloth a religious vestment. When you take them off, you cut them off, what do you have? Othone, a 4-cornered sheet. The head phylactery, you see how an individual has no problem walking in it, and it suits them quite well as a 4-cornered garment. This, by the way, is not just a phantasma of my imagination. This is how some of the talit are being made today. They're called shepherd's coats. And the Jewish Community Center in New York, Cy Hector, one of the rabbis there, is the one who pointed this out to me, this shepherd coat design. As you see, the fringes, as you turn around, Jason, only go up, these little fringes only go up 2/3. What they do today is they tie them according to contemporary understandings. But in antiquity, they may or may not have been tied. You can tie them, there's no problem. You could even squat, walk. It doesn't confine you, it doesn't, there's no problem. But this basically is my thesis. The shroud itself was the robe of Christ, the seamless garment that the soldiers confiscated, that the Joseph of Arimathea or the apostles or Mary, the mother of God herself, purchased back from the Romans, and they used it as a burial cloth in accordance with the most current law of Rabbi Gamaliel, as we see in the Moed Katan 27b found in the Talmud. Good scripture of the various garments he was wearing at the time from the Last Supper up until the crucifixion. Okay? Mike? Here's the front of the shroud, and what we're looking at here is this one section around the chest, center of the chest, around the sternum bone. As we take a look at that, what we're looking at is what I believe to be this. These would be the cut-off zitzit, the tassels that we were looking at before, and they were cut off and laid along the chest, the sternum. Now, if you notice a difference, the zitzit I showed you were quite big. That's the way they make zitzit today. They don't make them exactly the way they did 2,000 years ago because the customs have changed. And basically what you're looking at is the original 1st century style zitzit, which was very, very small, and that would have been in each of the corners. And that actually was part of our own experiment to see that the contemporary zitzit, obviously a man wearing a 4-cornered garment would be tripping on them because it makes it too long. But the original size, and if this can be bore out by a better study scientifically, directly to the shroud itself using microphotography, then we'll be able to see if all of this information corresponds. From so far, that's my thesis, is that it would. Now, what we need to do is to take a look at some of the issues surrounding the terminology for the garment or linen found in the New Testament. Now, the very first thing I'd like to bring up is Mark 14:51 verses through 2, which identifies the Sindone as a 4-cornered garment. And the reason why he does that is because if you know the anecdotal story, the Roman soldiers grab a young man by his robe and he runs away naked. Now, this is actually a little bit of a logic problem. The word he uses for the young man is neaniskos in Greek. Neaniskos in Greek is a very specific, very precise term that refers to a young adult male about 20 years of age, but under the age of 21. So in this particular case, a Jewish young man, a neaniskos, would have already been bar mitzvahed and had been bound by the Jewish law to wear a four-cornered garment with tzitzit. Now, the only garment he was wearing was a sindon, according to Mark 14:51 through 2. Now, logically, it means what? The sindon has to be, by law, a four-cornered garment with tzitzit. So now that we've resolved the idea about the sindon, as I said earlier, is the four-cornered garment with tzitzit, but when you cut off the tzitzit at burial time to use the sindon as the shroud, the tzitzit, which made that ordinary cloth a sacred religious vestment, it now becomes an ordinary cloth, an othone. And that becomes the terms, when you examine both the Gospels of John and the Gospels of Luke, you see how the terms change, and it's because the tzitzit have been removed, and they are now burying Christ in the sheep. Now, where do we get this analogy? Is also the fact in Luke's Acts, he mentions the othone as well. And the othone are always described in the Acts as a four-cornered garment. He says a large garment with four corners falling down, coming towards me, and falling towards the earth. And so these are the exact terms according to Luke. So we know it's a four-cornered garment, but it's without the tzitzit. The sindon has tzitzit. The young man in the Garden of Gethsemane had the othone having tzitzit was sindon in Mark 14. So basically that is the nuances, the finesse of meaning from one word to the other as each of the sacred writers employed the term. Another very interesting aspect to all of this is Mark 15, verse 46. And Mark uses a very specific term, agorasas sindona. Agorasas sindona typically has always been translated, at least in English, as he purchased or he bought a sindon, or he bought a linen cloth, or he bought a linen sheet. All the various ways that these have been translated. Now, what I'd like to point out is the fact that agorasas sindona actually has three possible meanings. One, he purchased a sindon. Second, he redeemed the sindon. And third, he paid the tax on the sindon. Now, clearly the word agorasas means, obviously, in general use, to either purchase or to redeem. Now, when we say he redeemed the sindon, he had to, because it was already in the possession of a Roman soldier, according to the Gospel of John. In John's Gospel, we see quite clearly that in chapter 19, verses 23 to 24, the Roman soldiers confiscate the clothing, and they cast lots, they roll dice, and one of them wins the garment. So now, if they're going to bury him in his robe, according to the law, as Gamaliel, the leading rabbinic teacher in the day, as we read in the Talmud, Bavli, and Moed Katan, 27b, he has to be buried in this four-cornered garment, and the term again was takrikum, his robe. And what we're going to see is that they have to purchase it back. And this is exactly what Mark is saying in 1546. Agorasas sindona, he redeemed the garment, or he paid the tax on the garment, which is another possible meaning, that the monies were given to Pilate, and Pilate dispersed the funds to the soldier upon demand of the garment. And that seems to be the most logical way that it was bought. Religious art, because that's the Sidarium. You all have heard very much information and different theories about the Sidarium. Now you've seen the Sidarium. The Sidarium itself is 16 inches wide and 6 feet long. Originally they would have torn it in half, so you had two 6-foot-long strips 8 inches wide. Each of these strips in turn was torn into, or cut into 9 segments, so that in all you had 18 8-inch squares where little swatches were taken, and on these were painted the various icons of the Holy Face through time. That's why they were known as Sidaria. And basically what we have is a very interesting theory that actually began with Carlo Bertelli many years ago. And he had noticed in the Matilda Chapel in Rome, in the Vatican, on the back is a very detail showing the same twill weave as the shroud. And so, in my opinion, that is a remnant of the original Sidarium to the shroud. It's a two-piece garment. One was destroyed and converted into 18 swatches, to which Holy Face icons now fill churches around the world. And the Matilda Chapel in Rome, I believe, is one of them that could very much have the original swatch from that Sidarium. Another aspect to the shroud